The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., and Sarah Martinez reached out to silence it before it could wake her children. Her hand brushed against the framed photo on her nightstand, the last family picture they'd taken with Carlos. She allowed herself 5 seconds to look at his smiling face before pushing back the worn comforter and getting up. The wooden floor creaked under her feet as she tiptoed past Emma's room. Sarah peeked in, watching her 12-year-old daughter's chest rise and fall. The breathing was even tonight, no wheezing. Thank goodness. They couldn't afford another emergency inhaler this month. In the next room, 8-year-old Miguel had kicked off his blankets again. Sarah carefully tucked them back around him, brushing his dark hair from his forehead. Her heart ached when she saw the math worksheet on his desk, covered in red marks. If only she could afford a tutor to help him. In the bathroom, Sarah splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and a few gray hairs had sprouted at her temples. At 34, she felt twice her age. The morning routine was automatic now. Brush teeth, pull back hair, touch of mascara to look alive. The Jerry's Diner uniform hung pressed and ready. 3 years of double shifts had faded the once bright blue to a tired gray, but it was still clean and neat. Carlos always said presentation mattered. The kitchen was dark as Sarah made coffee and packed lunches. PB&J for Miguel, turkey sandwich for Emma. She tucked a note into each bag. I love you more than all the stars, Mama. Her own breakfast was coffee and half a banana. The other half she saved for later. Every penny counted. Sarah's ancient Toyota grumbled to life on the third try. Please, just hold together a little longer, she whispered, patting the dashboard like an old friend. The car had been another of Carlos's projects. He was always fixing things, making them work just a little longer. Now she had to figure it all out alone. The streets were empty as Sarah drove to work, streetlights casting orange pools on the wet pavement. Spring rain had fallen overnight, and the air smelled fresh and clean. She parked in her usual spot behind Jerry's Diner, next to the dumpster. The neon open 24/7 sign buzzed overhead, casting a red glow on the puddles. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Morning, Sarah, called Jerry from the kitchen. He was already prepping for the breakfast rush, his white apron dusted with flour. Jerry had been good to her after Carlos died, giving her extra shifts when she needed them most. Morning, Jerry, Sarah called back, tying her apron around her waist. She checked her apron pocket, order pad, pens, tip calculator, and her lucky quarter, the one Carlos had given her on their first date. She never worked a shift without it. The early regulars would start arriving soon, truck drivers ending their night runs, construction workers starting their day, office workers grabbing coffee before the commute. Sarah knew most of their orders by heart. Earl would want his eggs over easy with extra toast. Martha always ordered oatmeal with brown sugar on the side. Mr. Chen needed his coffee black with 3 sweetened lows. As Sarah filled the sugar dispensers and checked the ketchup bottles, she ran numbers in her head. Emma needed a new inhaler. $75 with insurance. Miguel's teacher suggested summer school for math, $200 for the program. The car was making that clicking sound again. The rent was due next week. Sometimes it felt like drowning in slow motion, trying to keep her head above water one bill at a time. But Sarah wouldn't let herself cry. Not here, not now. She had customers to serve, and Carlos always said that service with a smile wasn't just good business. It was a way of sharing light with others. So she straightened her back, checked her reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser, and practiced her smile. It was going to be a long day, but she would get through it. She always did. The bell above the door chimed as the first customer walked in. Sarah grabbed her order pad and pen, ready to start another day of making ends meet, one table at a time. The morning rush at Jerry's Diner was in full swing, but something felt different today. Sarah couldn't explain it as she hurried between tables with coffee pot in hand. Maybe it was the way the spring sunlight streamed through the windows, making the worn linoleum floor shine like new. Or maybe it was the unusual number of cars in the parking lot. Shiny black SUVs with tinted windows that looked out of place next to the regular pickup trucks and sedans. "Sarah!" Jenny burst through the kitchen doors, her blonde ponytail bouncing. With excitement. "Did you see those fancy cars outside? Something's going on." Jenny was 22 and treated every day at the diner like an adventure waiting to happen. Sarah remembered when she used to feel that way too, before life had taught her that adventures usually came with bills attached. "Can't stop to chat, Jenny," Sarah said, balancing plates of scrambled eggs and toast on her forearm. "Table 7. Needs their breakfast, and Mr. Peterson's coffee cup is empty again." She'd perfected the art of carrying 6 plates at once, a skill she'd never planned on having, but one that helped her serve more tables and earn more tips. The morning regulars filled every booth, their conversations creating a familiar comfort of background noise. Earl was telling anyone who would listen about his daughter's college graduation. Martha was sharing pictures of her new grandchild. Mr. Chen sat in his usual corner booth, scanning the newspaper while his coffee cooled to the exact temperature he preferred. But there was something else in the air today. Sarah noticed Jenny wasn't the only one acting differently. The cook, Big Mike, kept peeking out from the kitchen window, which he never did. Jerry had changed his shirt twice already, and he hadn't done that since the health inspector's last visit. As Sarah refilled coffee cups, she couldn't help thinking about the bills stuffed in her purse. The letter from Emma's doctor sat heavy in her apron pocket, reminding her that her daughter needed new breathing treatments. The school's summer program deadline for Miguel was coming up too. She'd been picking up extra shifts, but it still wasn't enough. "More coffee, Mr. Peterson?" Sarah asked, already tipping the pot over his cup. He was a kind man who'd lost his wife last year. Sometimes he came to the diner just to have someone to talk to. "Thanks, Sarah," he said, covering his cup after a perfect pour. "You're looking tired today. Everything okay with the kids?" Sarah managed to smile. "Oh, you know how it is. Emma's asthma is acting up again and Miguel..." She stopped herself. Customers didn't come here to hear about her problems. "They're good kids. I'm blessed." The diner's bell chimed as more customers walked in. Sarah turned to greet them, but Jenny practically sprinted to the door. Through the window, Sarah saw more black SUVs pulling into the parking lot. The morning sun glinted off their polished surfaces. "Sarah!" Jerry called from behind the counter. "Could you check the coffee station? We're running low on filters." His voice sounded strange, higher than usual. Sarah nodded, though she'd just restocked the filters an hour ago. As she walked to the storage room, she heard whispers from the kitchen. Big Mike was talking excitedly to Jenny, who was practically bouncing up and down. "He always travels with security. My cousin saw him at Gold's Gym once. They say he orders everything with extra protein." Sarah shook her head and focused on her work. Famous person or not, customers were customers. They all needed their coffee hot, their eggs cooked right, and their toast buttered just so. That's what Carlos used to say. Treat everyone the same, whether they arrived in a limousine or on foot. Still, as she organized the coffee filter she didn't really need to organize, Sarah felt that strange feeling again. Like the air before a storm, when everything gets quiet and still. Like the moment before Carlos had proposed, when she'd known something wonderful was about to happen. Like the terrible silence before the police had told her about the accident. The bell chimed again. Sarah heard Jenny gasp, followed by the distinct sound of a plate dropping in the kitchen. She took a deep breath and straightened her apron. Whatever was happening, she had tables to serve and bills to pay. She couldn't afford to get caught up in excitement over some mystery customer. But as she stepped out of the storage room, even Sarah couldn't help but freeze for just a moment. Because there, ducking his head to enter through the diner's door, was a man whose massive frame she'd seen countless times on the television screen in her living room, watching wrestling matches with Carlos and the kids on their old couch. The diner fell silent as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson made his way to an empty booth, followed by two men in dark suits who scanned the room with watchful eyes. He wore a baseball cap pulled low and dark sunglasses, but there was no hiding who he was. His presence filled the small diner like a sun entering a room full of stars. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat as memories flooded back. Carlos jumping up from their couch, cheering during wrestling matches, teaching Miguel to do The Rock's signature eyebrow raise. She pushed the thoughts away and took a deep breath. Famous or not, he was just another customer who needed his breakfast. Jenny appeared at Sarah's elbow, clutching her order pad so tight her knuckles were white. Oh my gosh, she whispered. That's really him. Sarah, you have to let me take his table. Please. But Jerry was already walking over, making a subtle gesture towards Sarah. Table 8 is yours, Sarah, he said quietly. Jenny, I need you to handle the counter. Jenny's face fell, but Jerry had made his choice. He knew Sarah was his most professional waitress, the one who never got flustered no matter who sat in her section. Sarah smoothed her apron and walked to table 8, her comfortable work shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. She could feel every eye in the diner on her, but she kept her focus on her customer, just like she would with anyone else. Good morning and welcome to Jerry's, she said, her voice steady and warm. Can I start you gentlemen with some coffee? Rock looked up and removed his sunglasses, revealing kind eyes and a gentle smile that made him seem more human somehow. Good morning, he said, and his voice was exactly like it was in the movies, but softer, meant just for their conversation. Coffee would be great, thanks. Black for me, and… He glanced at his companions. Just water for us, one of the men in suits said, still scanning the room. Sarah nodded and went to fetch their drinks. As she walked away, she heard whispers from other tables. Phones were appearing in hands, but the security men's stern looks quickly convinced people to put them away. Sarah was grateful for that. She knew The Rock probably wanted to eat his breakfast in peace, just like anyone else. When she returned with the coffee and water, The Rock had removed his cap and was studying the menu. Everything looks great, he said. What do you recommend? Our omelets are popular, Sarah replied, falling into the familiar rhythm of describing the menu. We can make them with egg whites if you prefer. The grilled chicken breast is good too. We can do it plain, or with our house seasoning. Perfect. I'll take the egg white omelet with spinach and chicken breast on the side. Extra chicken if possible. And do you have any sweet potatoes? We don't usually serve them, but… Sarah glanced toward the kitchen. Let me check with our cook. I know we just got some in for tomorrow's special. The Rock's face lit up with his famous smile. That would be amazing, thank you. As Sarah walked to the kitchen, she realized her hands were shaking slightly. Not because she was serving someone famous, but because of how much The Rock's smile reminded her of Carlos. They had that same way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. Big Mike was beside himself when Sarah gave him the order. The Rock wants my cooking, he whispered excitedly, even as his hands moved professionally, cracking eggs and heating the grill. Wait till I tell my kids. While the food was cooking, Sarah tended to her other tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders like it was any other day. She noticed The Rock watching her work, especially when she helped old Mr. Wilson cut up his pancakes. Mr. Wilson's arthritis was bad today, but he hated to ask for help. Sarah always pretended she was just adjusting his plate, while she quickly cut everything into bite-sized pieces. When Sarah brought The Rock's meal, everything was arranged perfectly on the plates. Big Mike had outdone himself, making the egg white omelet fluffy and light, the chicken breast seasoned just right, and the sweet potatoes roasted to perfection. This looks incredible, The Rock said, and Sarah could tell he meant it. Thank you. He glanced at her name tag. Sarah. You're welcome, she replied. Can I get you anything else? No, this is perfect. He paused, then added, You know, my mom was a waitress. Worked double shifts to keep food on the table when I was growing up. I know it's not an easy job. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him about Carlos, about how they used to watch him wrestle, about how Miguel still did the people's eyebrow whenever he was being sassy. Instead, she just nodded and said, "It's a good job. Lets me take care of my family." The Rock held her gaze for a moment, and something passed. Between them, an understanding maybe, or a recognition. Then Sarah's order pad buzzed with a new ticket, and she was back to her routine, moving between tables with practiced ease. But as she worked, she could feel The Rock watching her interactions with other customers, noting how she remembered everyone's names, how she slipped an extra pancake onto the plate of a construction worker who always scraped his plate clean, how she helped a young mom calm her fussy toddler by bringing crayons and a paper placemat. These were all just normal parts of Sarah's day, things she did without thinking, but somehow, having The Rock notice them made her stand a little straighter, made her think of Carlos, and how proud he would be that she was still trying to bring light into people's lives, one small kindness at a time. As Sarah refilled The Rock's water glass, her mind drifted to Friday nights from what felt like a lifetime ago. The tiny living room in their old apartment would come alive with excitement as Carlos lifted Miguel onto his shoulders, both of them mimicking The Rock's entrance music. Emma, barely 5 then, would giggle and clap from her spot on their worn couch, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. "Know your role!" Carlos would shout along with The Rock, and Miguel would dissolve into laughter, nearly falling off his dad's shoulders. They didn't have much back then, but those Friday nights made them feel rich with happiness. The water glass trembled slightly in Sarah's hand as the memories washed over her. A few drops spilled onto the table. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, grabbing a napkin to wipe up the water. The Rock looked up with concern in his eyes. "Everything okay?" Sarah's throat felt tight as she nodded. "Yes. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "My husband Carlos and I used to watch you wrestle every Friday night with our kids. He was such a huge fan." Something in her voice must have given away the past tense, because The Rock's expression softened with understanding. "Used to?" he asked gently. Sarah busied herself with wiping the table, though it was already dry. "He passed away 3 years ago. Car accident on his way to work." She forced a smile. "I'm sorry, you don't need to hear all this while you're trying to eat." "No, please," The Rock said, setting down his fork. "Tell me about Carlos." Sarah glanced around the diner. Her other tables would need attention soon, but Jerry caught her eye from behind the counter and gave a slight nod. He would cover for her, just for a moment. "Carlos was a dreamer," she said, allowing herself to remember. "He worked as a mechanic, but he had bigger plans. We were saving up to open our own restaurant." She smiled at the memory. "He said my cooking could make anyone smile. Called it food for the soul." The Rock listened intently, his famous face showing genuine interest. "What kind of restaurant?" "Nothing fancy, just good food made with love, the kind that reminds you of home." Carlos had it all planned out. He'd work the front, greeting everyone like family, while I ran the kitchen. Sarah's voice grew softer. "He even had a name picked out, Casa Martinez, where everyone's family." A timer dinged in the kitchen, pulling Sarah back to the present. "I should check on your sweet potatoes," she said, straightening up. "Can I get you anything else?" The Rock shook his head, but his eyes followed her as she walked away. Sarah could feel tears threatening to spill over, but she held them back. Carlos wouldn't want her crying at work. He'd want her taking care of business, just like she'd been doing since he left. In the kitchen, Sarah took a moment to compose herself. Big Mike pretended not to notice as she wiped her eyes with a paper towel, but he slid an extra sweet potato onto the Rock's plate. "For good luck," he whispered. As Sarah carried the plate back to table 8, she remembered the night Carlos had first told her about his restaurant dream. They'd been sitting in this very diner, sharing a slice of pie after her shift. Carlos had pulled out a wrinkled napkin covered in his messy handwriting, menu ideas, cost calculations, even a rough sketch of how the dining room would look. "We'll make it happen, mi amor," he'd promised. "Maybe not today or tomorrow, but someday. And when we do, our kids will never have to worry about money for school or doctors or anything else." Now, watching The Rock enjoy the sweet potatoes, Sarah wondered what Carlos would think of their current situation. Their savings had gone to his medical bills and funeral expenses. The restaurant dream had died with him, replaced by the reality of double shifts and endless bills. But sometimes, late at night when the kids were asleep, Sarah would pull out Carlos's old notebook. The pages were worn now, but his dreams were still there in faded ink. The menu items they'd planned together, the calculations for how much they'd need to save, even the logo he'd sketched for their future business cards. The Rock's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "These sweet potatoes are amazing," he said. "Your cook has real talent." Sarah smiled. "That's Big Mike. He puts love into everything he cooks." Just like she used to do, back when she had time to really cook instead of just heating up quick meals between shifts. As she turned to check on her other tables, Sarah's hand brushed against her order pad, and she felt Carlos's lucky quarter through the fabric of her apron pocket. She always kept it there while working, a small reminder of their shared dreams. Maybe the restaurant would never happen now, but she was still doing what Carlos had always said mattered most. Taking care of people, making them feel welcome, bringing a little light into their day, even if it was just by remembering how Mr. Wilson liked his coffee, or slipping an extra pancake to a hungry construction worker, or helping a celebrity feel like a regular person just trying to enjoy his breakfast. Mr. Wilson had been coming to Jerry's diner every day since his wife passed away last spring. He always ordered the same thing: 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast with a little butter, and a small bowl of fruit. Sarah knew his routine by heart, just as she knew that his arthritis got worse on rainy days, and that he kept a picture of his late wife, Eleanor, in his wallet. Today was definitely a bad day for his hands. Sarah could see it in the way he gripped his fork, his knuckles white with effort. The morning's rain had brought the kind of damp chill that made old bones ache. She was in the middle of refilling the Rock's coffee when she noticed Mr. Wilson struggling to cut his eggs. "Excuse me," Sarah said softly to the Rock. "I need to help another customer for a moment." The Rock nodded, but Sarah was already moving toward Mr. Wilson's table. She didn't see the way the Rock turned in his booth to watch, or how his security, a team exchanged knowing looks. "Here, let me help you with that, Mr. Wilson," Sarah said, sliding into the booth across from him. She took his plate as if she was just adjusting it, the way she always did to protect his pride. Her hands moved quickly, cutting the eggs and toast into bite-sized pieces. "You're an angel, Sarah," Mr. Wilson said, his voice rough with emotion. "Eleanor used to cut my food just like that when the arthritis got bad." Sarah smiled, remembering how Carlos used to help his own father at family dinners. "Would Eleanor have put a little extra hot sauce on the eggs?" she asked, already reaching for the bottle she kept ready at the wait station. It was Mr. Wilson's favorite, though his shaking hands had trouble with the small cap. "Just 3 drops," Mr. Wilson said with a small laugh. "You remember everything, don't you?" "Well, I remember that Eleanor told me to look after you," Sarah said, adding the hot sauce carefully. "And I always keep my promises." What Sarah didn't say was how much these moments meant to her too. How helping Mr. Wilson made her feel connected to Carlos, who had always taught their children that family wasn't just about blood, it was about taking care of each other. From his booth, the Rock watched the interaction with intense interest. Sarah could feel his eyes on her, but she focused on Mr. Wilson. This wasn't for show. This was about doing what was right, what was human. "How are the kids?" Mr. Wilson asked as he took his first bite of perfectly cut eggs. "Is Miguel still struggling with his math?" Sarah nodded, adding a little more hot sauce just the way he liked it. "He's trying so hard, but numbers just don't come easily to him. Like his mama," she added with a small laugh. Carlos was the one who could do math in his head. "Well, tell him his friend Mr. Wilson says to keep at it," he said, reaching for his wallet with trembling hands. "And give him this for me." Sarah saw him trying to pull out a $20 bill and gently stopped him. "Now, Mr. Wilson, you know I can't take that. You save it for your granddaughter's college fund." "Stubborn as Eleanor you are," he said, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "At least let me leave you a good tip." "You being here every day is tip enough," Sarah said, standing up. "Your friendship meant the world to Eleanor, and it means the world to me, too." As she walked back to the Rock's table, Sarah didn't notice how he had quickly returned to his meal, pretending he hadn't been watching. She didn't see the way he scribbled something in a small notebook, or how he whispered something to one of his security team. "Sorry for the interruption," Sarah said, reaching for the coffee pot. "Can I top off your coffee?" The Rock looked up at her with new eyes, as if seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "You've worked here a long time, haven't you?" he asked as she poured. 3 years, Sarah replied. "Ever since Carlos." She paused, then added, "It's a good place. Good people. I can see that," The Rock said softly, and something in his voice made Sarah look at him more closely. But his expression was unreadable as he returned to his meal. Sarah moved on to her other tables, falling back into the rhythm of the diner. She didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness with Mr. Wilson had set something big in motion. Sometimes the smallest moments of compassion can change everything. Carlos had always said that too. Sarah was refilling sugar dispensers near the Rock's table when her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. Normally, she never checked her phone during work, but the caller ID showed Emma's school. Her heart jumped into her throat as she hurried to the break room. "Hello," Sarah answered, trying to keep her voice steady. The last time the school had called during her shift, Emma had ended up in the emergency room. The medical bills from that visit still weren't paid off. "Mrs. Martinez? This is Nurse Chapman from Lincoln Middle School." The nurse's voice was calm, but urgent. "Emma's having some trouble breathing. She used her rescue inhaler, but it's not helping as much as it should. She says it's been running low." Sarah closed her eyes, leaning against the break room wall. The prescription for Emma's new inhaler was sitting in her purse, but she hadn't been able to fill it yet. The insurance wouldn't cover a refill for another week, and the out-of-pocket cost was more than she had in her checking account. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked, her free hand clutching Carlos's lucky quarter through her apron pocket. "Do I need to come get her?" "Her oxygen levels are a little low, but not dangerous yet," Nurse Chapman said. "We have her sitting quietly and doing her breathing exercises. But Mrs. Martinez, she really needs a full inhaler. The one she has is almost empty." Sarah's mind raced through options. She could ask Jerry for an advance on her paycheck, but she'd already done that last month when Miguel needed new glasses. The credit card was maxed out from car repairs. Maybe she could sell something. Her wedding ring? No, she'd promised. The kids, she'd keep it for them. "I'll figure something out," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, just keep her calm and call me if she gets worse." After hanging up, Sarah took a few deep breaths, just like she taught Emma to do during her attacks. Panic wouldn't help anyone. She had to stay focused, keep working, keep earning tips. Maybe if she picked up an extra shift tomorrow. When she returned to the dining room, Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she had to grip her order pad with both hands to write. The Rock was still eating his sweet potatoes, taking his time as he chatted quietly with his security team. She needed to check on him, to be professional, even though her mind was racing with worry about Emma. "How is everything?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. The Rock looked up, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw concern in his eyes. Maybe he had noticed her hands trembling, or the way she blinked back tears as she reached for his water glass. "Everything's perfect," he said gently. "Are you okay? You seem worried about something." "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically, the way she always did when customers asked. But then she remembered how he'd talked about his own mother working double shifts, and something made her add, "Just a call from my daughter's school. She has asthma and sometimes—" She trailed off, not wanting to burden him with her problems. "That must be scary," The Rock said, and his voice held such genuine understanding that Sarah felt her carefully maintained composure crack just a little. "It is," she admitted, "but she's strong, like her dad was." Sarah managed a small smile, thinking of how Carlos would sing silly songs to distract Emma during her asthma attacks when she was little. Her phone vibrated again in her pocket, another text from the school nurse. Sarah's heart raced, but she couldn't check it now. She had tables to serve, customers to take care of. Emma would have to be brave for a little longer, just until Sarah could figure something out. "Excuse me," she said to The Rock, already turning toward her other tables. "I should get back to work." As she walked away, Sarah didn't see The Rock pull out his phone and start typing rapidly. She was too busy calculating numbers in her head. How many more tips she'd need today, which bills could wait another week, whether the pawn shop would give her enough for her mother's old necklace to cover the inhaler. The diner seemed to blur around her as she moved between tables, her body on autopilot, while her mind raced with worry. Every few minutes, she glanced at the clock, counting the hours until her shift ended, and she could go to Emma. But first, she'd have to find a way to get that inhaler. Somehow, she'd figure it out. She had to, because that's what mothers did. What Carlos would have wanted her to do: keep going, keep fighting, keep finding a way forward even when it seemed impossible. Sarah straightened her shoulders and picked up a fresh pot of coffee. Her customers needed her, and right now, their tips were Emma's best hope for a new inhaler. The lunch rush was starting to wind down when The Rock finally pushed his empty plate away. Throughout his meal, Sarah had noticed him watching her interactions with other customers, how she remembered that Mrs. Chen was allergic to pepper, how she helped a young mother clean up after her toddler spilled orange juice, how she made sure the construction workers' coffee cups never ran empty. Sarah's phone hadn't buzzed again, which she hoped meant Emma was doing better. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she printed The Rock's check. The morning's tips had been good, but nowhere near enough for Emma's inhaler. She was already planning to visit the pawn shop after her shift, hoping her mother's necklace might bring enough to help. As she walked toward The Rock's table with the check, she remembered Carlos's voice. "Head high, mi amor. You're doing important work." He used to say that whenever she felt discouraged about waitressing. Now, those words helped her keep her composure even as worry for Emma gnawed at her stomach. "I hope everything was satisfactory," Sarah said, placing the check folder on the table. The total was higher than their usual tickets. The Rock had ordered extra portions of everything, and the special request sweet potatoes hadn't been cheap. The Rock reached for the check without looking at the total. "Everything was perfect," he said, pulling out a sleek credit card. But instead of immediately handing it back, he held onto the check folder for a moment. "Could I get a pen?" Sarah offered him her order pad pen, the good one that Carlos had given her for her birthday the year before he died, with her name engraved on the side. The Rock took it with a small smile, as if he understood its significance. His security team was already standing, ready to leave, but The Rock took his time. Sarah tried not to hover as he wrote something on the check, but she couldn't help noticing how carefully he formed each letter, as though every word mattered. Finally, he closed the check folder and handed it back, along with her pen. Their eyes met for a moment, and Sarah saw something there. Compassion, understanding, and something else she couldn't quite read. "Thank you, Sarah," he said softly, "for everything." As The Rock stood up, his presence once again filled the diner. Phones appeared in hands despite the security team's stern looks, but The Rock didn't seem to mind now. He smiled and waved at the other customers, signed a few autographs, and even did his famous eyebrow raise for Big Mike, who had peeked out from the kitchen. Sarah clutched the check folder to her chest. feeling Carlos's lucky quarter press against her heart through her apron pocket. She wanted to look inside, to see what the rock had written, but something made her wait. Years of waitressing had taught her that some moments needed to be private. Jenny appeared at her elbow, practically vibrating with excitement. "Sarah!" she whispered urgently, gripping Sarah's arm. "You have to look at the check. You have to look right now!" Sarah glanced toward the door where the rock was still talking with customers. He caught her eye and gave her one last smile before ducking his head to exit through the diner's door, his security team following close behind. The black SUVs pulled away from the parking lot as Sarah finally opened the check folder with trembling hands. What she saw made her knees go weak, and a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob escaped her lips. Sarah stared at the check in her trembling hands, tears blurring her vision. The tip amount alone was enough to cover Emma's inhaler, Miguel's, summer school, and 3 months of rent. But it wasn't just the money that made her heart skip a beat. It was the note written beneath the signature, the words that would change everything. "I watched you help Mr. Wilson with his breakfast," the rock had written in careful letters. "It reminded me of my mom, who waited tables while raising me. She taught me that real strength isn't about muscle. It's about heart. The way you treat people, the kindness you show, the dignity you give everyone who sits at your tables. That's real strength." The note continued. "Your husband would be proud of how you've carried on, bringing light into people's lives one small kindness at a time. But I think it's time for your dreams to come true too. I have a restaurant in need of a manager, someone who understands that good food is about more than just the meal. It's about making people feel at home. Call this number. Ask for Pat. Tell him the rock sent you because he found someone with the heart to make Casa Martinez a reality." Below the note was a phone number and another message. "P.S. The job comes with full medical benefits. Get Emma that inhaler today. Pat will be expecting your call." Jenny read the note over Sarah's shoulder and squealed with excitement, but Sarah could hardly hear her. Her mind was spinning with memories, Carlos sketching restaurant layouts on napkins, teaching Miguel to cook his grandmother's recipes, promising her that someday their dream would come true. "Sarah?" Jerry's voice broke through her thoughts. He was standing beside her, concern written on his face. "Are you okay?" Sarah looked up at her boss of 3 years, the man who had given her extra shifts when she needed them most, who had understood when she had to miss work for Emma's doctor appointments. "Jerry, she began, but her voice caught in her throat. "Show him the note," Jenny urged, practically bouncing with excitement. As Jerry read, his eyes grew wide. When he finished, he looked at Sarah with a mixture of joy and sadness. "Well," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "looks like I'm going to need to find myself a new best waitress." "Oh, Jerry," Sarah said, tears flowing freely now. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take it," Jerry replied firmly. "Carlos would want this for you. We all do." Sarah reached into her apron pocket and pulled out Carlos's lucky quarter, running her thumb over its worn surface. She could almost hear his voice. "Dreams don't have expiration dates, mi amor. They just wait for the right moment to come true." "Mom?" a familiar voice called from the diner entrance. Sarah turned to see Emma standing there, still in her school uniform, with Miguel beside her. The school secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, stood behind them. "I hope it's okay," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "When Emma started feeling better, she really wanted to see you. I offered to drive them over during my lunch break." Sarah opened her arms and her children ran to her. As she held them close, she felt Carlos's presence stronger than ever. She knew what she had to do. "How would you kids feel about helping Mama run a restaurant?" she asked softly. "A place where everyone's treated like family? Like in Dad's drawings?" Miguel asked, his eyes wide. "Exactly like in Dad's drawings," Sarah replied. "Casa Martinez is going to become real." Emma's face lit up. Can I help design? The menus? Dad always said I could design the menus. Sarah laughed through her tears, holding her children closer. The diner had fallen silent, everyone watching their moment of joy. Even Mr. Wilson was wiping his eyes at his regular table. Jerry cleared his throat. I think this calls for a celebration. Big Mike, we need a slice of apple pie over here. On the house. As Sarah sat in a booth with her children, sharing a piece of pie and beginning to plan their new future, she couldn't help but look toward the door where the Rock had ducked his head to leave. He had seen something in her that she had almost forgotten was there. The dream that had been waiting patiently all these years, kept alive by every small act of kindness, every moment of treating others like family. Carlos had always said that dreams come true in their own time, in their own way. Sometimes they just need a helping hand, a kind heart, and maybe a little bit of star power to light the way forward. Sarah reached for her phone, ready to call the number that would change their lives. As she dialed, she remembered what Carlos used to say about the Rock. He's not just strong, mi amor. He has a good heart. That's what really matters. Today, Sarah had discovered just how right Carlos had been, and just how much a good heart could change everything. If you were moved by this inspiring story of courage, resilience, and hope, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us of the power of kindness. Your support helps us share these important messages with the world.